Imam rahimahullah ta'ala moves on talking about the resurrection, the gathering of both body and soul to be judged, etc. And of course, there is a stage there in the middle, which is what we call al-Barzakh, which is typically referred to as life of the grave. And this is from the unseen world as well. And so the believer believes in the unseen, even if some of it is difficult to grasp or understand. It's not for a person of faith to reject or deny the unseen world because it doesn't make scientific sense. It's found in Revelation, the Quran, and in the Hadith, the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Then our job is simply to surrender our intellect and accept that which we do not know. So the Imam, he goes on, rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, the life of the deceased in the grave, meaning that it's an obligation to believe in the life of the deceased in the grave, which has been proven both in the Quran and numerous authentic narrations from the Prophet ﷺ. The life of the grave, or al-Barzakh, and all that is related to it has been narrated so many times, so many different narrations. It's reached a level of widespread transmission, if you will, that it's impossible to reject or argue. And therefore, it cannot be rejected, and so it's an obligation. It says, faith in it as well as the events which occur therein is an obligation, such as being compressed within it, is noted by the Imam, being compressed. And here it's a literal physical compression, if you will, which will be momentary for the believers and will be constant for the deniers. The deniers meaning al-Kuffar, those that denied faith in this life. Everyone will go through that pressing or squeezing of the grave, but for a person of faith, it will be momentary. Because each and every one of us has something that we brought with us of sin. So when we go into the grave, we will feel some type of compression, and there will be relief. It will release us, but for the disbeliever, it will be a constant squeeze. It says the return of the soul to the body both before, while in the grave, in which it will stay for 7 days being tested. The number of days has been reported by some of the early generation from the Tabi'in, from the generation after the companions. Because this issue deals with the unseen, there's no room for intellectual prowess or creativity. It's something that's acceptable here, because Tabi'in, from the generation after the companions, they narrate something of the unseen. It means that they heard it from a companion, who of course heard it from the Prophet ﷺ. So this was reported that, the believer, their soul will be tested for 7 days and then will be released from the grave. And after its annihilation, return of the soul to the body after its annihilation. When you're resurrected, the body is resurrected and brought back, and the soul is joined with the body. But while the body is in the grave, the soul is free. After it's been released, it's free to move about. Imam al-Safarini rahimahullah ta'ala mentions 40 days for the deniers and for the disbelievers. They'll be tested and tried for 40 days. Allah knows best. However, the soul of the believer is released at some point in order to move about. He says, speaking to Munkar and Nakir. And these are the names of the two angels as explicitly mentioned by Imam Ahmad. Imam Ahmad explicitly mentioned that these are the names of the two angels that will visit when a person is buried in their grave. He says, who are the two angels who enter upon the deceased, be they young or old, meaning the deceased, whether they're young or they're old, and therefore performing the talqeen is preferred for both young and old. The talqeen is when you try and gently urge a person on their deathbed to say La ilaha illallah. That this is preferred, that these are the last words that they say. And the person that is standing by their side, as a part of the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and the care for a person getting ready to pass, is to encourage them that these be their last words. And so there has been some debate as to whether or not you should do that for a young child, because they're غير مكلف, right? They're not morally responsible yet. So someone that's like 5 years old that can say it, but they're not being held accountable for their misdeeds. Should you still say it or not? And so the scholars were in a debate about this. And so you have two different sides. But the authoritative position, official position of this particular school, the school of Imam Ahmad, is that it is preferred regardless the age, because everyone will be asked. And so he says here that the angels, they will come and they will enter upon the deceased, delivering good news or giving a warning. And they're questioning of the deceased. So we'll talk about the good news and the warning coming up. They're questioning of the deceased. And so there's been some hadith, the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that there will be a number of questions that will be asked of the person in the grave about Allah, about their religion, about their prophet. Who is Allah? What is your religion? Who is your prophet? Various different narrations, various different manners in which the questions are asked. And also, if all of the questions are asked or not. So it will vary depending on the deceased, the case of the one that's being asked. Also, is it two angels or one? It may be one angel who asks in the company of the other angel. It may be that only one angel visits the deceased in order to kind of lighten the burden on them, because the angels, they're quite horrific in their appearance. So there could be a variation of this. They may ask some of the questions reported in the various narrations, or they may ask all of them. So one such narration was collected by Imam Abu Dawud. It's a collection of hadith, Sunnah Abi Dawud. It's on the authority of al-Bara ibn Azib. He said, we went out with the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam for the funeral of a man of the Ansar. And when we reached his grave, it had not yet been dug. So the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam sat down, and we sat down with him as if birds were on our backs or on our heads. And they used to sit very quietly and tranquilly with the Prophet ﷺ. He had a stick in his hand which he was scratching the ground with. And then he raised his head ﷺ, and said, seek refuge with Allah from the punishment in the grave. And he said this 2 or 3 times. There's another version. Jabir radiallahu anhu adds here, he says, he hears the beat of the sandals when they go back, and at that moment he is asked, oh so-and-so, who is your Lord, what is your religion, and who is your prophet? So here you can see in this different version of the same hadith, these are the 3 questions that are being asked. And also, if you'll pay attention, the awareness of the one in the grave, of those that are visiting. He hears their sandals as they walk away from the grave. So the deceased can hear and is aware of what's going on outside, according to this narration. It says, Hannad's version says, 2 angels will come to him, make him sit up, and ask him, who is your Lord? And he will reply, my Lord is Allah. And they will ask him, what is your religion? He will reply, my religion is Islam. And then they will ask him, what is your opinion about the man who was sent on a mission among you? He will reply, he is the messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They will ask, who made you aware of this? And he will reply, I read Allah's book, believed in it, and considered it true, which is verified by Allah's words. Allah establishes those who believe with a word that stands firm in this world and the next. That Allah gives firmness in this position, in the grave, to answer these questions. The agreed upon version of the hadith is, then a crier will call from heaven, my servant has spoken the truth, so spread a bed for him from paradise, clothe him from paradise, and open a door from him into paradise. So some of its air and its perfume will come to him, and a space will be made for him as far as the eye can see while in the grave. Hadith mentioned also the death of the denier or the disbeliever, saying his spirit will be restored to his body, soul. There you go. Soul will be rejoined with the body. 2 angels will come to him, make him sit up and ask him, who is your Lord? And he will reply, in the Arabic says, ha ha. Like, huh? Like what? He says, I don't know. Then he will ask, what is your religion? And he will reply in the same way, I don't know. They will ask him, who is the man who was sent on a mission among you? He will reply, I do not know. And then a crier will call from the heaven. It will say, he has denied. He has denied faith. So spread a bed from him from hell, clothe him from hell, and open for him a door into hell. Then some of its heat and its wind will come to him, and his grave will be compressed so that his ribs will be crushed together. Jabir's version adds to this, one who is blind and dumb will then be placed in charge of him, having a sledgehammer, such that if a mountain were struck with it, it would become dust. He will give him a blow with it, which will be heard by everything between the east and the west, except by men and jinn, and he will become dust. Then his spirit will be restored to him. So this is one hadith, different variations, narrations of it, showing us some of what the Imam Ibn Balban was talking about in his treatise or in his manual. The next he goes on and he says, the reward and punishment of the deceased is experienced by both body and soul. The reward and punishment of the deceased is experienced by both body and soul while it's in the Barzakh and in the hereafter, as both experience reward and punishment in this life. The reason why this is mentioned is because this was an issue of contention or debate. Some were of the opinion that after you die, the body is kind of finished, and it's only the soul that receives punishment or reward. But the great Imam al-Safarini mentions, and this of course is based on evidence, something very important. He says that Allah has made 3 realms: the world, the grave, or the Barzakh. Because the grave may not necessarily mean the actual grave, because you may find that someone dies, they drowned, their body was lost to sea, or they were burned and you couldn't recover their remains to even put in the grave, or they were eaten by an animal or something. You couldn't gather anything to put in the grave. So what would happen? Does that mean they're exempt from the process? No, of course not. Everyone that dies will go through in some form or fashion, and Allah knows the modality of how that will happen. Some form or fashion they will go through this very same thing, the very experience. So it's not necessarily the grave, in the physical grave that we typically bury the deceased. We refer to it as life of the grave because that's what's commonplace. But the Barzakh is talking about this existence or this realm, this time between life and the hereafter. So that is the second realm, and the third, of course, is Dar al-Qarar, which is eternally abiding in the hereafter. Each realm has a law which governs it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has also made everyone from 2 parts, a body and a soul. So 3 realms and 2 parts to our existence, body and soul. The rulings of this world are based on the body with the soul in tow. Right? The soul, of course, is attached to the body. And the Sharia, which is what we apply in this world, is based on physical actions of man, even if inwardly there is conflict. And so punishments are doled out in a physical form, and the soul is hurt as a result. So it's about what you do. It's about the actions that you do. It's not so much about what you believed or what you wanted or intended. It's about what happened physically. And so the physical punishments are inflicted, and the soul also feels that. So the laws which govern the grave are based on the soul with the body in tow, the opposite of this world. It's like spiritual law, if you will. Therefore, just like the soul followed the body in the world and was hurt due to the body's pain and pleased with physical pleasures of the body, which had direct contact with the causes of both pain and pleasure, the body will experience both pain and pleasure as a result of the spiritual punishment or reward the soul receives. So it's the opposite. Right? The law that governs the Barzakh is a spiritual law. But the body still is in tow with the spirit, with the soul. And so it feels pleasure and it feels pain based on the reward or the punishment of the soul. In the hereafter, both the body and the soul will be primary. There won't be one in tow. They'll both be primary, receiving either punishment or reward. Regardless of the case, both body and soul will share in the reward and or punishment, which is something that Shaykh al-Islam quotes a consensus on. And as I said, there are some people that differed. And of course, this is the official position of this particular school of Imam Ahmad. The next chapter, or I should say sub-chapter section, the deceased's knowledge of their visitors. So we just indicated in a hadith that the deceased, while in the grave, can hear what's going on outside. They can hear the sandals of those that have come while they're walking away. And this is the official authoritative view of the school, and was mentioned by the great Imam Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, was affirmed by Sheikh Mar'i al-Karmi and the other reference works of the madhab, that the deceased can hear the visitors of the grave. Ibn Muflih, one of the great imams, narrates from his teacher, who happened to be Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, that the reports of the deceased being aware of their families' and friends' conditions in this world are numerous narrations. Not only does the deceased in the grave hear, but they are made aware of you and how you are doing. So, here in our culture, we have this saying, they would be rolling in their grave. If they could see you now, they would roll in their grave. Almost like, you're doing something shameful, and if your late grandparent or father or mother saw what you were doing, they would roll in their grave. It's just preposterous to think that you're doing that. You're the son of so-and-so, how could you be behaving that way? And if your parents saw you, though they're long gone and dead, they would be shocked. Well, guess what? They could be made aware of what it is that you're doing. It's also been reported that they can see and know what they are doing when visiting. They are pleased with good things and are hurt by that which is loathsome, the deceased. It says, the Muslims' souls are in the claws of green birds, eating in paradise, and the souls of the disbelievers are in the claws of blackbirds, eating in the fire. And this topic here, the Imam is actually, it's almost a paraphrase. It's close to a direct quote of a hadith that was reported by Musa ibn Ubaidah. This is a narration. He's not the Sahabi, but he's one of the narrators along the chain, in which the Prophet ﷺ was reported to have said almost that very thing. That the believer's souls are in the claws of green birds eating from paradise, and the disbeliever's souls are in the claws of blackbirds eating in the fire. Basically, the issue is, where do the souls go? Do they stay in the grave? Or are they released? And so he's indicating that they're not staying there in the grave. They're somewhere else until Qiyamah. They go somewhere else. Ibn Rajab, rahimahullah ta'ala, great imam, mentioned this narration. And then he said that Musa ibn Ubaidah, one of the narrators of this hadith, not a companion, he's later on, was a pious sheikh and became engrossed in worship, and therefore had many slip-ups in narrating hadith, as if to say, we're not using this hadith to form an official opinion, because Imam Ahmad believed, as it was reported, he explicitly said that the souls of the believers are in paradise, while the souls of the deniers are in hell, without confining it to the claws of birds, eating, etc. In general. So, basically the idea is that the soul, after it rejoins with the body, because once the body dies, the soul is removed from the body. And while the body is being washed and prepared for burial, the soul is on its own journey. It begins a journey, and it's greeted by the angels. And it's wrapped in a cloth, like the body's being wrapped, and it's perfumed. And it's carried up into the heavens, or to the heavens. And then it's returned back to the body once the body's buried. And then it stays with the body for a period of time. And then The soul is released, and then it, goes wherever it goes. And then it rejoins the body at Qiyam, and it's with the body. So, these things are always mentioned because it's something that you should, come to expect and understand. The next and last section we're going to talk about this evening, which is nice, short, and sweet, is the display of the deceased destination. So the Imam Ibn Balban, rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, and that the deceased destination will be displayed to them in the morning and in the evening. Meaning, it's an obligation to believe that the deceased destination will be displayed to them in the morning and the evening. Your final destination of either paradise or hellfire. If they are from the dwellers of paradise, then it will be from the dwellers of paradise, meaning their destination. And if they are from the dwellers of the fire, it will be from the dwellers of the fire. It will be said, this is your destination until Allah resurrects you on the day of resurrection. And this is directly pulled from a hadith reported by Imam Bukhari and Muslim. Ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma reported that the Prophet ﷺ said, when any one of you dies, he is shown his seat in the hereafter, morning and evening. If he or she is amongst the inmates or dwellers of paradise, he or she is shown the seat from amongst the inmates of paradise. And if he or she is amongst the denizens of hell, he or she is shown that seat from amongst the denizens of hell. And it would be said to him, that is your seat until Allah raises you on the day of resurrection and sends you to your proper seat. That's where we'll conclude for the evening.